Just brief presentation. Thank you for coming. I just finished reading How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, which he advocates a whole food, plant-based, or conventionally known as a vegan diet.
Yes.
He's got chapters, chapter on cognitive decline as well as one on suicidal depression, and cites a number of studies that say that that a vegan diet is associated with benefits around those things. You're less likely to. Have you compared that type of diet or looked at the research and seen how that compares to a Mediterranean diet?
No. This question has come up before. So there is good evidence that a vegan diet is protective. Again, it goes back to that it's plant-based. It's maybe even potentially more protective because it doesn't have any animal sources. But the observational evidence is strong, but there has, to my knowledge, been no randomized trials, like comparing them face to face to see which one may be more effective. Yeah.
What does it mean to supplement with olive oil?
So this would be adding it to your diet and replacing any fats with, so maybe that wasn't the right word. So it wouldn't be like taking a vitamin. It's taking over basically all the fats in your diet, and to consume that amount, you might actually have to take like a tablespoon here and there. Yeah.
This is with olive oil.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about supplementing with olive oil and what that means. So replacement, but potentially also just consuming the olive oil on its own.
Does the olive oil have to be like a certain temperature to be protective?
Yeah, so there is, I'm not a food scientist, but there's definitely research to show that how you're keeping the olive oil can affect its bioactive and health promoting properties. Also, there's debate on like exactly what type of olive oil it should be to see the health benefits. So I can't say like yes or no, but for sure there's ways you can protect your olive oil so that you maintain those properties. Keeping it in a cool, dry place, not in hot temperatures.
I'm thinking about like if you heat it at a high temperature for cooking, or whether you eat it like whole in a salad or something.
It's a good question.
Do you know if there's a difference in, because I've heard somewhere that like heating it on a high flame will change the chemical makeup of it, and then it's not healthy anymore, but that's what I was wondering.
I don't know if I can say definitively if it's not healthy, but it's probably decreasing those bioactive properties. So to get the maximum health benefit, you would probably want to consume it, like you're saying, in a salad or dipping something in it where it hasn't been changed chemically, potentially with heat.
Has the mechanism by which a high-fat diet can lead to leaky gut been fully explained yet?
No, some of the work that is suggesting that hypothesis, a lot of it's been done in animals. There is a way to actually look at this in humans where you can have somebody ingest a type of tracer, put them on a controlled diet, and look at how that tracer moves across into their blood to see how that particular diet might be affecting their gut integrity.
It seems that if you keep those tight junctions tight, you can stop the translocation of gram-negative bacteria into the bloodstream and then avoid the maybe associated inflammation.
Exactly.
Stop all the downstream effects.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
I don't know if the Mediterranean diet is, olive oil is important and is a key in the cooking processes or serving processes. And I remember living in Mallorca, which is part of
I went there a couple of years ago. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they used olive oil for everything, like to cook snails, from the ocean. But one thing that struck me, especially in the 50s when I was able to spend a few months, even though I was a kid, is that there was very little use of beef. But people were eating lamb and pork and chicken, and they were eating a lot of fish. And so almost especially the poor people would eat a lot of fish, especially people along the coast, fresh out of the ocean. And we know that the fish also has a lot of omega oils. And we have to even look at studies that compared coastal coastal people with inland people, and inland people probably aren't as healthy.
True. Yeah, I agree. So again, I agree with what you're saying, that it's not one thing in the Mediterranean diet, and it could definitely vary based on the region the person was living.
So we had, if you had a toast, the Mediterranean bread was probably different. You would have with oil on it, not butter. They didn't eat pancakes and all those things that
Right.
which are highly popular. And there are also some diets that are also, my church memory is not that good. But there are also some diets that are in the Caribbean and in Peru that are also partly Mediterranean-based, and that use olive oil, at least in Cuba whenever they can get it. But most people I know from Cuba who have spent most of their life before the revolution,
Do you want me to give him
that spent most of the time before the revolution, what they ate is olive oil and lived into their 90s. So there's, if you smoke, you ruin your diet, but if you don't smoke, you just live and live and live. And so there's populations now where the issue is with the centenarians in Spain and Italy and Cuba.
Japan as well. Yeah.
And we also need to look at we need to also look at Asian diets, which we haven't yet, or I haven't.
I'm sorry, sir, do you have a question?
Yeah.
You can,
So I think we
you
need
can
to
talk
recommend
after
more
the
than just,
talk
I
if you
think we
want.
need to recommend more than eating olive oil.
Oh yeah, no, I'm recommending the pattern. It's not just the olive oil. Right, yeah, it's the total pattern. I'm sorry if anyone thought I was just saying drink and eat olive oil. No, it's the overall, we don't think it's one particular aspect of the Mediterranean diet. And a lot of these plant-based diets, it's the synergy of the nutrients and how they're working together. And that's why it's important, and what we work on a lot in my lab is diet patterns, and not just necessarily one single aspect of diet, so nutrients or a certain food. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of work to be done. Sure.
Were there any twins or triplets in the studies for Tussing-Humphreys?
Twins and triplets, no. Not that I can't speak to the observational studies, but usually that's something that it would be great to have a twin study, but I didn't pick that up when I went through those particular studies, that it was looking at twins. Yeah.
What role do our genetics play? Like, I have several family members that have had Alzheimer's, and are there any correlations between the diet and people who come from families that have higher
So the question was, how does diet play a role in people that have genetic risk factors for dementia? I didn't present it, but there is a few studies looking at how diet impacts progression in persons that have the ApoE4 defect, which is a major risk factor for dementia, showing that, not looking at a Mediterranean diet, but looking at their intake of a Western type pattern, that it seems to accelerate their progression to dementia. So there is definitely diet-gene interaction happening. And this is for most everybody, and that's something we don't know a lot about. Like, everyone here potentially may react differently to the same diet. So that's something our field continues to understand, so we can better personalize things for people. But it's not going to affect everybody the same way. Yeah, it's a good question.
As far as the negative impacts of fat potentially on dementia and Alzheimer's and depression, do you think it has to do with something about the fat molecules themselves, or more that fat tends to concentrate toxins in our environment, and so it might be, kind of like ingesting too much lead or DDT or dioxins or things like that that have just polluted the environment over the years? So as I assume, I've heard environmental factors like lead can play a significant role in Alzheimer's.
Yeah, so a lot of studies now, I don't know about that specifically, how toxins that you're potentially ingesting related to your foods plays a role, but A lot of studies are starting to look more at the interaction between a person's environment, their lifestyle, and some of their biological factors to better understand and control for these competing factors that increase a person's risk. Yeah, so that's a good point.
What types of cognitive trends are you seeing in bariatric patients? For example, someone who's had a gastric bypass or vertical sleeve gastrectomy, do you see that those people tend to have less depression or less?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, when a person has a bariatric procedure where they lose a lot of weight relatively quickly, do we see changes in their cognitive or their mood? We do, and that's why we added the weight loss component to our bridge trial as it relates to cognition. So you do see cognitive changes with bariatric weight loss, and also you see changes in mood. That's a great population to study because you have the effects so rapidly. So we use that population a lot to look at these relationships. We know the effect's going to probably be obviously less in a lifestyle intervention, but there is a strong and causative effect related to the weight.
And what is that effect?
Yeah.
Oh, do you mean like the mechanism?
Are you seeing folks that have less depression because they?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I'm not doing this research myself, but in the literature, persons that undergo a bariatric procedure and lose weight have less depression at follow-up, and their cognitive health is better compared to a control group. Yeah.
So risk factors for things like dementia, Alzheimer's would actually decrease?
Correct. Yep, the risk factors would decrease.
You could review the non-modifiable slide.
Oh, sure. Can they see the slides? So these were the non-modifiable risk factors for the types of dementias that I discussed. So the one I just mentioned is an ApoE4 genetic defect, and this is actually a significant risk factor for Alzheimer's dementia, and it affects how your body metabolizes fats. Age is also a non-modifiable risk factor, so as we age, our risk increases for these types of dementias. And there's a lot of research emerging that women are more prone to Alzheimer's type dementia compared to men, and it's not clear why. They think it might be related to the hormonal transition, a woman's metabolism, body composition change, so this is really an active area of investigation.
Years of education that's referencing the likelihood of a lifestyle intervention being successful?
No, so this is persons that have more years of education. It's protective, actually, from these more so Alzheimer's dementia. Yeah.
Do you happen to analyze changes to a person's gut microbiome? Or?
Yeah, so I didn't present that, but my PhD student is doing that research right now. Yeah, good question. And we're trying to look at the gut leakiness effect and that within the context of our bridge trial.
Not to hit you with another vegan I read the China study too, and then super immunity, and then found out to die. And I'm just wondering, like overall in the health community, it seems like people are moving away from like supporting plant-based protein or animal-based protein or plant-based protein. I wonder if there's any studies out there that you know of that are like it seems like you were kind of more on board with plant-based protein than animal-based protein.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
Oh, well, a lot of the research is observational, but there's a lot more coming studies that are randomized trials to try to really understand how these different plant-based diets affect a person's health. We're doing a study now at UIC switching a person from an animal-based protein diet to more of a plant-based protein diet to understand how it affects the gut microbiome, but also some factors that are linked to colorectal cancer, so looking at some things at the molecular level in a person's colon in response to these different diets.
Yeah. What were the demographics of people in this study? I'm not sure which study, but gender, race, age, marital status, etc.
So for most all of the studies I presented, it varies a lot. As I mentioned, a lot of the observational studies have been in European, primarily white individuals. Also Australia has a lot of these cohort studies. Here in Chicago, it was more, there was more diversity in the Chicago Healthy Aging Project, but it still skewed more to Caucasian. In our particular trial, which makes the Bridge trial unique, is we're specifically targeting African Americans because they have higher risk for dementias. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you measure or qualify improvements?
So in our study, we have a neuropsychologist and neuroscientists that work on our study team, and we have a cognitive battery. It takes about 45 minutes for a person to complete that is assessing several different domains of cognitive health. I know from talking with her that we have a global score that we're going to use to assess change or difference between our treatment groups, but we may look at some of those domains individually as well. So we do a lot of practice before we enroll our first subjects, and I took the cognitive battery, and it was very stressful. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a more generic question, but I'm a layperson, but just kind of doing some self-research on diet and nutrition, there just seems to be so much advice that's conflicting advice. What's your sense of just where we are in the science on this? Is it just we're early, or do you feel like the science in general on health and nutrition and diet is settled, and it's just different people trying to make a buck, promoting whatever the
I think it's both.
thing is?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. This is asking about, for the people listening in, do we know what we need to know about nutrition and health? So I have a colleague at UIC who studies intermittent fasting for weight loss and alternate day fasting for weight loss. There are a ton of books on that. There are very few evidence-based trials on that topic, except there's like 20 books about it. So I think it's like both. I mean, you have some really great authors that their books are written for the public that do take the time to go through the evidence, but a lot of times it's not necessarily kind of like what I presented to you in that comparison of the headline versus the actual study. It's not curated in a thoughtful way where it's really getting at the evidence. So to answer you, I will say I don't think we know everything. I think with all of the emerging technology where we can look at things more at a molecular level and be able to personalize things more and know how a person responds differently to different diets, I think that's a really hot moving area. So I would say no, we don't know everything. And a lot of times, like with any science, there's a lot of bad science. So I think it really depends on, again, like what your source is, thinking about, was this a study was it designed the right way? How many people did they do it in? Was it in animals? So there's a lot to weigh when you're wading through all of the books and magazine articles and websites.
One thing that's bothered me over the years in terms of measuring diet is the measures of people that are used now.
Mm-hmm.
The 24-hour recall, 48-hour recall. And one of the things, how do you repeat it enough to really get a picture of what's going on? Because sometimes people will be healthy during the week, and then terrible on the weekends. And I know that like the Mexican American community, people completely change their eating patterns from weekdays to weekends.
Yeah, so I think I just mentioned this briefly at the beginning. We don't do a good job measuring a person's diet. This is something we're trying to figure out. The NIH, the National Institutes of Health, has a lot of funding to give toward this area to better capture a person's diet. Some of the things that are still not perfect that I know people are developing are like phone-based technologies that are linked to a nutrient database, and they work with engineers where they're able to quantify the portion size and things like that, but you still have issues where people don't take the picture. So then you still go back to your old way where you have to call them on the phone. Why didn't you take a picture? What did you eat during that time? So you're still going to have some bias related to that. We just don't have something perfect or a perfect tracer right now that we can give to somebody that we can measure diet in totality.
Is there any attention being given to in terms of animal protein versus plant-based protein, any attention being given to the source and the quality of the animal protein? For instance, corn-fed or grain-fed cattle, the meat from the meat source is going to have a more pro-inflammatory effect on the body versus your grain, your grass-fed, grass-finished, or your bison, which are still pasture-raised. Or whatever. Any attention being given to
So that's a really interesting question. So people are starting to pay attention to this. So we use a lot in our field. So this is looking at not just like looking more at the quality of the food source. People are starting to delve into this because right now we use these scoring indexes to determine if a person has a high quality diet or a low quality diet. But we're coming to find that doesn't, something else is important, and I think it gets to what you're saying is that the quality of those different foods. So that's a great question. All right, well, thank you so much.